Thank you. Welcome to the panel on BlockDown for a look into alternative DeFi, where we'll be talking with a host of very notable guests. So we have here Kevin Sekniqi, who is the CEO and co-founder of Avalanche Labs, or Avalabs rather. And then we have Teck Chia, who is the head of Binance X, and he'll be representing Binance Smart Chain and its entry into DeFi. We have Anatoly Yakovenko, who is the CEO of Solana, and he'll be representing Solana and the DeFi platform that is now kind of getting into serum and has seen some surge of popularity lately. And finally, we have Fabian Gompf, who is the VP at Parity, which is the company behind PolkaDot, which is also one of the blockchains that is often positioned as contestant to Ethereum, essentially. So before we move into the actual kind of discussion here, I wanted to get your take on what do you think of Ethereum and DeFi and what's happening in the past few months, and do you think it has been obviously with ups and downs, so a lot of stuff that may be questionable a little bit, but so what do you think of what we've seen so far, and how does it demonstrate the strengths and weaknesses of DeFi so far on Ethereum? So I'll go to Kevin first, and then we go around with all the others.
I think it's fantastic. It's probably one of the big first innovations to happen in the crypto space in some time. Where we saw for many years many different claims of what's this whole technology about, and I think now we're kind of seeing a realization of it. Programmable democratic finance is seems to be one of the biggest value propositions of crypto. Programmable capital. We always kind of assumed that was going to be the case, but now it's really materializing, and I think it's an incredible innovation. Of course, when there is very fast-moving innovation, there can be also a lot of bad players, and we've seen some not so great projects in DeFi, and the S word has come along again sometimes, but I think it's a very fantastic innovation to happen.
Sure, and from a technical side, would you say that we're seeing some limitations, or is it what was
Sure. Certainly limitations, as deploying a smart contract on Ethereum got to the point where you had to pay something like almost $200, which is just deploying a small piece of code should not be like that. Transactions for simple value transfers got to the point where we're hitting $30 more or even more per simple transaction. Obviously, that's not sustainable, especially if you're trying to do a lot of transactions, and if we're trying to create programmable capital. We need the ways to transact very fast and very quickly and enter in and out of positions very quickly. So beyond the fact that it's just incredibly prohibitively expensive, certain types of applications in DeFi are simply not possible with current solutions, including things like prediction markets, where traders will want to come in and out of positions up to like the last second before maturity date of a contract. And this is just not possible with the current implementation. So very innovative technology, very limited though, but that presents a huge opportunity for new players, I would say.
Sure, thanks. So we'll definitely talk about all the other possible use cases enabled by other infrastructure. But next up, I want to ask Teck. So, what is your take? As as a Binance representative, of course, DeFi is kind of almost a competitor in some sense. So, do you see it as potentially something that could be essentially a threat to Binance in some way?
I think we see it as somewhat complementary. I think there's always people who, I think the difference is, we already centralized kind of platform that is accessible globally. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to a blockchain, which is very democratic in terms of access. But in terms of, user experience, where centralized, of course, is faster, order book exchange. Because as Kevin said, anything on the blockchain is going to be by definition slower because you have nodes having to have consensus and all that stuff to have consensus on a transaction in a block. So, but then again, the blockchain you don't need to have to trust the centralized entity for custody of your funds, and you can do it 24/7. And I think it's the way we see it, and the way we kind of have created different products for kind of different preferences and different kinds of use cases. So we kind of span the gamut in terms of what users want, and we're in this space, so we obviously believe in decentralization and blockchains, but we do recognize that different sets of users have different preferences and different use cases. So in general, I think it's very, very exciting. Just as Kevin said, we've been trying to find use cases, and DeFi has kind of gotten a little bit, a lot of traction product market fit. So I'm really excited to see that.
Thank you. Anatoly, so I know that you have a particular take on DeFi. So can you explain that, and how do you see Solana fitting into this vision of decentralized finance, essentially?
Yeah, when I started Solana, our first pitch deck had these cringy slides that said Solana is blockchain at NASDAQ speed. So I think I was really thinking about these platforms, especially smart contract platforms, as a implementation of a open permissionless exchange. I wasn't really thinking of the store of value use case. And I think fundamentally, if you get rid of proof of work, it's very hard to kind of have that belief in store of value. Kevin has some arguments for it, but I think we have a religion around proof of work as a store of value. So price discovery and being an exchange was really something that we were thinking of from day one. And I think the interesting part about DeFi is that you have this tech, which is you have this place to write programs that can implement a central limit order book, an AMM, or a risk engine or a lending protocol. The tech part, I think, is open and permissionless. That part of it doesn't really change it from DeFi to CeFi. I think the D part, the decentralized part, is the ability to leverage all of these pieces built by different teams without contracts, without B2B sales teams talking to each other and saying, lending protocol X is partnering with central limit order book Y, right? It just happens through code. I think that's the really neat part here is that teams working on this stuff can just leverage each other instantly without any friction globally. And I think that's really, to me, kind of the place of innovation, because I don't know if you guys remember when Linux kind of went through its boom time where everybody started building stuff on top of it and in this open collaborative way. That was just with software. That was just code that was running somewhere. Now we're doing that with code plus money. And I think this is kind of the crazy part of how fast this thing can innovate.
Sure, absolutely. It's definitely, for financial markets, it's definitely been a kind of a revolution. So I wanted to go to Fabian now. So I think you guys have a maybe more overarching vision of what DeFi is. So can you talk about how Polkadot and the parity in general sees DeFi?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I share the enthusiasm of everyone on the panel. I think it's awesome that DeFi happens to the blockchain space right now. If you think about the last bigger boom was probably 2016, 17 more till the beginning of 2018 with ICOs. And I think the way we're thinking about DeFi is, of course, you have the hypes and the forks and the craziness around it, but there's also a core innovation somewhere, right? And as kind of someone who builds infrastructure, that tends to be the things we're focusing on, and we're trying to identify and think about how we actually build infrastructure for the stuff. So, if you think about, maybe people are not talking about ICOs as much anymore, but it's still, the cornerstone of how people fundraise in the space. People maybe not talk about DAOs as much anymore, but it's still the cornerstone of how governance works in the space. Same with NFTs and so on. All of these things had their little waves, but there was somewhere a core innovation. And I think we're seeing that right now on multiple fronts in the DeFi space, but certainly with AMMs and liquidity farming and so on. And I think there is a core innovation that will stay on how we bootstrap liquidity into DEXs, how we distribute tokens, and if we're thinking about building infrastructure, that's the stuff we're interested in, right? It's not so much how did this fork work out or whatever. It's like what is that core thing that actually enabled this whole hype?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, DeFi, in many ways, it is a continuation of so fundraising, governance, DAO, right? The experiment failed in 2016, but now we're seeing quite a few successes like this. But I wanted to get a little bit into the focus of this panel, which is why it's called alternative DeFi. It's because most of DeFi action so far has been on Ethereum. We're seeing some technical limitations of it, but why do you think it has happened on Ethereum so far, for the most part? I mean, obviously, I guess Avalanche, Solana, Solana definitely was live before, but some of your kind of projects weren't really ready yet. But what is kind of the benefit that Ethereum has, and how do you plan on competing with it, essentially? So I'll go with Kevin for now, and then we'll move to the others.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Ethereum's benefit is that in a lot of ways it's the first mover. It's probably the first mover. It has the network effects. They're not particularly sticky network effects in a lot of ways, because I think empirically it has been proven that the users of DeFi, they're not really there for emotional attachment or anything like that, like maybe in a social network. This is more about just finding new sources of yield. If there is a new platform that has better yields, and I think there's going to be a mass exodus from Ethereum into something else. But unfortunately, right now, nothing particularly exciting is happening as exciting as it was in August and September for Ethereum. The benefit of Ethereum is that it's the first mover. It has all the things happening. It has the current attention. But obviously, the limitations have been exhausted at this point, and it's because Ethereum was not meant to be what it's being used for right now. I mean, it uses in a lot of ways revolutionary technology. Nakamoto consensus is revolutionary, but it's not meant to be what it is being used for. It's meant to be for quick, simple transactions that where we're not going to do like massive operations and smart contracts that are really expensive. And so we've hit that bottleneck, and we've seen it with the prices on transactions, simple value transfers, and smart contracts being deployed. So I think it's very much incredibly important right now for a new technology to prove itself that it has the same feature set of Ethereum. That means that it has same sort of applications, same sort of like opportunities that Ethereum does, and yet B, it provides all of these truly in a fast, cheap way without risking these properties that we were here for, which is decentralization. Ultimately, that's very important. It's going to be very hard for a party to be doing what Ethereum is doing while being a centralized entity. I mean, the risk there is tremendous. So you require, I would say, a decentralized platform where just code is law in a lot of ways, but currently right now nobody has yet to prove such a thing. I mean, we've seen things in the past, but there's contenders, obviously, us being one of them. Although we're just 1 month old right now, so we still have a whole lot to go. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This question of decentralization is also very interesting in the sense that I guess here I'm going to talk to Teck, who, I mean, Binance obviously, it probably has quite a bit of control over the chain, and as CZ called it, CDeFi, just to distinguish it from it, right? So basically, do you think that your solution kind of, in what way does it compete with DeFi? Like, do you think that people really want the C part of it, or is it something that progressively will decentralize as well?
I mean, first of all, I think we have two chains that are progressively getting decentralized over time. I think it's a trade-off between a speed of innovation versus decentralization, and then also like the bridge between centralized finance and decentralized finance. Obviously, we started out being a centralized service, and which we still continue to run, where we have the deepest liquidity and deepest markets, and that caters to a certain type of users. I would say, like Ethereum started out with a lot of like blockchain native, if you will, like developers, people who are a little bit more technical. And we started out with people, perhaps they're more on the trading end of the spectrum in terms of users. So I think bridging those two worlds is where we come in, right? We both bring in the people who may or may not be super active on like DApps or things like that in the past, and all of a sudden DeFi comes along and decentralizes all these financial markets with new and innovative stuff like AMM pools, which we haven't seen, but flash loans, innovation that people building on top of other protocols, composability, which is not being seen in the centralized world. So just bringing that set of users over, and then vice versa, where we bring liquidity to the DeFi world, I think it's our differentiator, I would say, and also kind of important for both sides, both the centralized services and the decentralized DeFi world. So I think it's more complementary than competitive, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Like definitely the integration between the two worlds, I think, is going to be important. And here I kind of go to Anatoly because I mean, Solana, like it's been kind of popularized for DeFi by Serum, right? The project, the decentralized exchange by FTX, which is nice in the sense that it's different. It's not something I can really do on Ethereum right now, but it's also a project from a centralized exchange. So do you see this kind of integration between centralized finance and decentralized finance as the key to adoption, or how would you describe?
I think like to survive, like every exchange needs to become a decentralized exchange. I think that, like, I don't know if you ever heard Sam talk. Basically, like the stuff that you're doing in Ethereum, if it gets to a point where it's fast enough, right? Like where a state transition or like an order on Ethereum travels as fast as the news, it doesn't need to be any faster than that to capture a ton of value in the trading space. And that's going to happen simply, you know, from us actually like being heads down, going towards that as fast as we can. But in general, like if there's a customer that needs it, somebody will build it, right? It'll just happen on its own. And all of these exchanges that are not decentralized will effectively kind of start losing market share. So I think like, you know, I don't even see us as competing with Ethereum. We're more competing with Binance. And we still love Binance, right? This isn't like us versus them kind of thing. This is and Ethereum as well is not really competing with other decentralized platforms. We're competing with Binance, but at a bigger sense with all the other exchanges, the London Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange. Like in like 5 years, everything's going to be tokens, right? You're not going to have people issuing an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange that isn't a token. So what does that world look like? Where do those tokens transfer? Where do those orders get executed?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the NASDAQ vision you outlined earlier. Well, I wanted to move to Fabian actually because it's kind of an interesting thing, right? Like Anatoly said that we're not competing with Ethereum, and I guess Polkadot, it makes a focus, right, on the fact that you're not competing with anyone. You're just an interoperable blockchain, and you are building a lot of bridges to other blockchains. So how do you see DeFi on Polkadot, and do you see it as really competing, or it's more like an addition to what is happening right now?
Yeah, so I think actually this like competitive meme comes much more from the community than from anyone else, right? It's not like we ever went out and we were like ETH killers or whatever. It's just like I spend most of my time in the blockchain industry actually on Ethereum, right? Parity has started as an Ethereum company, and that you know that's still very much in in our minds and our hearts. I think the way we see things shape out right now is if you see who's building on Polkadot, right? We have a pretty vibrant ecosystem. There's like 150 to 200 teams building stuff. That's chains, applications, tooling, and infrastructure. There are of course teams that are in the Ethereum space and coming over to Polkadot, or going cross-chain, doing their stuff on Ethereum and doing it on Polkadot as well. But actually, the bigger chunk is just new companies, right? People who just start stuff in this ecosystem. So you can do like technical comparisons and whatnot and what's better, but in reality, it's not so much competing over like one ecosystem. There's really just an ecosystem in itself emerging. And that's in a lot of sense complementary. If you look at the Ethereum teams that are building on Polkadot, a lot of them go cross-chain in the sense that they say, okay, there's another deployment here. We want to have these deployments crypto-economically, just feed into each other, and bridges and interoperability and so on are just really crucial for that. So if that's the world we're living in, then that's what we want to cater to. So in a lot of in a lot of ways, just in reality, what we're seeing, it's not so much a competition than a complementary thing.
That's an interesting viewpoint, actually, and here I kind of want to go into another line of questioning, which is what is kind of the benefit? Like, if you think of DeFi as a single ecosystem, right? What is the benefit that each of you brings, right? So what are the additional possibilities that you guys can bring to DeFi? And I guess there's the trading aspect, right? That DeFi is often positioned as decentralized banking and just being useful for the normal people, right? So do you see kind of your blockchain framework, I guess, as something that can actually be beyond the scaling part? It can just improve what you can do with DeFi and expand the possibilities. And I actually wanted to go back to Fabian here because obviously, just to spruce things up a bit. And Polkadot is interesting in that sense.
Yeah, totally. So I think the scalability point is the one that's most talked about because that's a very real and measurable problem people have on Ethereum right now. It's not scalable. The whole thing is overflowing. It's too expensive. But I actually don't think it's the majority of teams that are like. We're not a we are a scalability play. Polkadot is about scaling. But if you go, on our website or even like early marketing material, whatever, it's never that we said like we're a scaling project, right? Of course, it is about scaling. It's a sharded blockchain, and it's going to be more scalable. But I think there's actually much more to it, right? And scalability is almost like a side effect of just having like a system that you can shard and everyone can build their own chain, and those things are connected through this meta infrastructure. So what I see a lot is just flexibility and customizability that comes with it. So if you think about Ethereum today, it's a pretty static thing, right? You have the Ethereum execution environment, and that's what you have to work with. And people try to shoehorn all kinds of things into it, but in the end, that's what you work with. I think the idea of saying, well, why don't you build your own Ethereum? Why don't you build your own layer one, right? Without having to deal with all the painful things that come with it, but just from a pure like customizability point of view, I think that's very powerful, right? And that's what we enable, at least on a chain level, on Polkadot. But you can go all the way up to the stack and still just have the Ethereum model, right? Just run a shard that is an Ethereum execution environment and just deploy your contracts, and that's also fair. But you have this upgrade path into a much more sophisticated kind of like first order citizen in the system.
Interesting. Actually, like Kevin, do you think that this kind of approach of having just like one single blockchain for a project, for example, or just being it like build your own blockchain approach, is it really something that developers want with DeFi? Something that it's really an addition?
Not quite sure what the future is going to hold. Obviously, I have my own opinions on that. I think from a technical perspective, obviously, we also provide the ability to create execution environments within our blockchain. We also have this notion of subnet, which is not quite like a parachain. It's an entirely separate sort of network that can atomically interoperate with the main Avalanche subnet, and you can launch, a subnet, for example, that is permissioned, interoperates with Avalanche, or one that's permissionless fully and implements a different virtual machine. But I think this is like maybe too in the technical details, probably not the platform to discuss all the features that technically separate us from everybody else, including Ethereum. I think what is also very important is to ask the question of what do you bring to the DeFi table rather than just a developer table in general, DeFi space. I think as a team, for example, we've been very quiet about this, but we're working very hard in the back end to extend the DeFi world, to bring like all the types of assets on us. We're not just focused on the on the technological side of things, but it's really just about. I don't think crypto should be inwards oriented. I think we a lot of times kind of fight with each other. Oh, we're better. No, we're better. But we're not really like just being like, hey guys, we should probably just go out there and bring other assets and just fight against the externally facing non-crypto side of things. And I think we're trying to do that as much as we possibly can. Although of course we're a small team, but I think we're actually making huge headways there. And so that's what I think is going to set us apart going forwards. We have a really fast platform, really incredible technology underneath that really sets us apart. But not going into the details of it. But the more important thing is, chugging along and making the DeFi space a whole lot larger. And the larger side of things, the new side of things, hopefully should be deployed first on Avalanche. That's our game plan.
Sure, that's actually a good point in the sense that technology is kind of there. Like, I guess my point was more about the fact that developers. Sometimes it's hard to create projects, right? Like maybe arguably that's one of the reasons why EOS hasn't attracted so much attention, like red DeFi developers. And so I guess, but if we go outside that aspect, so what is that essentially you can bring, like except from speed? Like, is there some kind of advanced DeFi project that can do something really cool on Avalanche but not on Ethereum?
Yes, certainly. It's the speeds go a long way, the execution environments, but I think we're not alone in that. I think Polkadot and Solana, in a certain extent, do that as well. But the very important thing is the confirmation speeds open up the ability to do truly on-chain type of transactions that were not possible before, or rather only possible probably through a centralized entity. And so I think from a pure interface and feature set for current DeFi users, if you're building, for example, something like a prediction market, you cannot have a prediction market right now on Ethereum or rather you're going to only have very basic kind of predictions that are super long term, and you don't want to come in and out of positions quickly. But the biggest set of yields in prediction markets tend to be within a few seconds of maturity of the contract. So you have some last second information on some prediction, and you want to come in and out quickly. Not possible in Ethereum right now. It's with the confirmation times, the information is going to come well later than, or rather, the confirmation is going to come well after the information comes in. So it opens up the possibility for really new types of applications for current developers. And this is not understood quite yet. It's because we're still so used to the multi-minute confirmation times of Ethereum that it's like, well, that's normal. But no, it's actually not at all. It's going to open up a whole lot of new doors, I think.
Sure, absolutely. I assume, Anatoly, that it's kind of a vision that you guys share as well, right? That speed. Maybe a lot more.
I mean, like, I think to your point, I honestly think that there isn't much more beyond scalability. Like, I think that problem is hard enough, especially, I guess, the way I see it. If we're like the engine of price discovery, it's going to be like replicating petabytes of data globally across the world at like the speed of light. That's a hard problem. Like, that's going to keep us busy for years to come. So like, if you want to like see the difference between Ethereum and Solana, you can go to like dexprojectserum.com and then play around with a exchange, which is a central limit order book with like, Alameda and Jump providing liquidity at real time, which you can't do in Ethereum. So that speed, right, actually opens up the possibility of more capital taking risk on positions inside the network. The faster you can get it, the bigger markets you can replicate, the more capital can take positions, and more stuff can move from centralized systems to decentralized systems. And Ethereum is good enough for low liquidity tail end of things. It's got an amazing community to actually launch, like to do you build your project and you launch into this community and you get like people to buy your token and effectively fundraise. I think it's the new IEO platform. Like Uniswap is the new way to do IEOs, and that's awesome. Like I think that's awesome. Like, why not? Like that in itself is a massive success. And every platform doesn't need to be everything else. I think we have an opportunity to be this like decentralized version of exchanges and traders that bring in like all the like Jump and Alameda and all the other players into the decentralized side of the space.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point, and I think Teck, it's curious to see your take on this, because obviously, like Anatoly just basically said that we're going to make a decentralized version of what you guys are doing. So, do you think that decentralized exchanges have still a place in the future, for example?
Yeah, I think so. I think the world is diverse enough that there are users who have different use cases and different preferences in terms of how they interact with the financial markets, right? So the way we kind of see the world is that we obviously started with Binance.com, which is a central exchange, and we have the deepest liquidity there. And then we launched Binance Dex, which is a decentralized exchange, which has a native order exchange built into the chain that's very fast. And we have liquidity there. And then we recently launched Binance Smart Chain. We had full EVM compatibility to incomplete language and all that stuff. And also we have, and that's just like 2 months ago when we launched that. And it has different consensus scheme that makes block time very fast. And then we make all these three things interoperable in terms of tokens freely flow between all these three different services and products. Some users would prefer, and then not only that, we launched things on Binance.com, which is a central exchange, things like Launch Pool, which allows new DeFi projects to kind of bootstrap liquidity from users who may not be familiar with how to interact with like a Binance Smart Chain, which needs non-custodial wallets and things of that sort, so they can easily go to their Binance account and stake tokens and earn yield on decentralized protocols. So we kind of help bridge all these three sets of users. And then, of course, with liquidity on Binance.com, we can bootstrap liquidity on DeFi protocols, which is very important. A lot of these protocols require liquidity and price discovery to actually make it work. So we kind of play a role, like CZ always says, the bridging between centralized finance and decentralized finance. And I think that's where we differentiate. I think going forward, of course, the ideal world for the blockchain industry is for everything to be decentralized. But I think the world is diverse enough that there are always users that prefer to have prefer to trust somebody else to have custody over their private keys, because it's too difficult for them to do so, and also have recourse into the customer service and people teach them how to do things, and instead of learning how to participate in Uniswap, they rather stake with somebody they trust, like Binance.com, and we help them. They delegate that responsibility to us, and we can help them earn yield in all these DeFi protocols, which also helps these protocols because they have liquidity. So I think, I think that's going to continue for a while, if not forever, because the world is just so diverse.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, definitely, there's always going to be a place for something centralized. Whenever you're dealing with fiat, for example. Exactly. So, I guess we're kind of coming up to the end of the panel, more or less. But I wanted to ask one more question, essentially, which is the future, what it holds, and essentially, how do you guys see DeFi evolving? Because obviously, Ethereum kind of fans will see that it's all going to stay on Ethereum. At most, we'll have these layer 2 solutions like the rollups. And so it's all going to stay on Ethereum. These other chains will be useless, and so on. So, and in a sense, they're maybe right, because obviously we've seen a lot of Ethereum killers in the past, and it's they haven't had that much success. So, what do you think is going to happen in the next few months? And do you think that you guys actually have a chance of really taking over that spot? And I want to start with Fabian here, and then we'll move on to the others.
Yeah, totally. So I think what we will see, and we're already seeing that to some extent, is like DeFi in itself is like, it's like a movement in itself. It's a community in itself. I'd say there's a lot of people in DeFi that don't really care that much about Ethereum, right? It's people are more thinking in Aave and Compound and Maker than they were thinking in in Ethereum terms, and that's true for users as well as developers. And I think that will continue, and that will just mean, okay, if there is something that actually, if you have a problem and there is something that solves that problem, I think it will be used, right? Someone said this earlier. These people are not necessarily very sticky, right? It's not very sticky adoption, even within the DeFi ecosystem. I certainly don't think it's very sticky necessarily to Ethereum, as long as there is something that actually solves a problem and doesn't create 5 other problems, right? Like, okay, you solved the scalability problem, but now I'm locked out of the rest of DeFi and I am locked out of all these network effects. Then you haven't actually solved any problems, right? Or you solved one but created 5 others. But if there's like actual true improvement, then I don't think there's necessarily a great stickiness to Ethereum. And I don't know if that's a couple of months time scale. It might be longer than that, but I certainly think that's the trend we will see.
Absolutely. Like if you think about it, ultimately layer 2 solutions are also an ecosystem on their own, right? All the various rollups. So Kevin, what do you think of this? Like, is it a possibility that we'll have really this interoperable world essentially of various blockchains?
No, I totally agree with Fabi here. It's I was talking about the stickiness before. It's it's a ridiculous statement that Ethereum is unkillable there. I mean, there were many MySpace killers until eventually one actually came, and that was Facebook. And it's always going to happen. I mean, unless Ethereum innovates fast enough, really be ahead of everybody else, then it's gonna at some point go back. And the L2 thing is a ridiculous one. I mean, we're going back to a centralized solution, which might actually be a money transmitter, and we'll see how the law pans out. If they're actually successful, they might just be shut down because they're quite literally a centralized solution doing money transmitter services without KYC or anything like that. And Binance knows just how crazy it is to go through that entire process in and of itself. And now imagine not going through it with the KYC and all the other stuff. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think if Fabi's exactly right, if we offer something that is truly incredibly fast, incredibly cheap, and it doesn't create any other new problems, then we're onto something. And that's kind of exactly what we're going for. The whole Ethereum killer never worked out thing is a ridiculous statement, and it's just not relevant to the current set of new technologies that are out there and how we think about these competitive landscapes. Before, nobody, like, there was no maybe even reason for a Ethereum competitor to be out there. Like, there was Ethereum and there were others, but none of them had use. And now we do have a use with DeFi, and now we're trying to compete and create the platform that is going to really absorb these kinds of applications in a really seamless way. But otherwise, I think, exactly as I said before, the stickiness of the platforms of the Ethereum space, specifically for the DeFi stuff, it's really more towards the DeFi component, not to the blockchain itself. So even if, for example, DeFi projects were to move to us, if some new other project came along that is much better than Avalanche, they're certainly going to move over. So there is no stickiness to Avalanche either. It's just going to be about constantly competing to offer the absolute best product. And we're super early on. What does the future hold? I think is going to be a really, really exciting few years of actually competing for improving these products versus just more speculation type of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to go back to Anatoly, because obviously you guys have kind of experienced a little bit of this non-stickiness because Serum is getting traction. So what's your take on this? Like, do you believe that essentially other layer ones have a better chance?
I mean, like, I think there is something to the Ethereum moat. Like the fact that, like, it's pretty hard for another market maker, even on Ethereum, to compete with Uniswap. And you have to, that in itself is a moat, because people get used to a domain name or a URL, and there's a lot of stickiness there. I think there is something interesting in the sense that Ethereum users are crypto users first, and they will try other platforms. They get it. I think we have effectively in the space, we have our own kind of user base, which includes everybody that's ever, bought Bitcoin on Binance, right? Or like anyone that's ever played with crypto is a potential customer, because they're already kind of get it, you know. Even if it's just like, I think this thing is an asset or something like that, they still kind of get that there's something here in the space. So building products that, you know, are interesting for these folks is what everyone is trying to do. And from our perspective, like, we've been focusing on things that you can't do in Ethereum, you know, like central limit order book is a protocol that you couldn't build on Ethereum. This opens up a new set of like possibilities for folks to combine and leverage. You know, you can take the same Aave style lending protocol and plug it into Serum, and now you've actually implemented a bunch of products that are like effectively what's an offering on Binance right now. Like everything that you see in Binance can be implemented with just combining these pieces, and that's really, really cool. Not that I'm like, I think like Ethereum and Binance are both innovators and both have a ton of stickiness around their platform, and it's up to every one of us to kind of build their own community, build their own kind of like user base that prefers something on Solana versus anything else. But that stuff is fine, right? Like, we're all competing to make better products. That's good. I'm like, I guess, personally excited about like things like USDC just went live on Solana. That opens up a bunch of boring use cases like point of sale sales, like, you know, B2B transfers of dollars between businesses that don't have to use a wire, right? Like, things like that are possible. You can do it on Ethereum, but you don't want to, like, it's a bad experience for a business that sometimes gets a fast transaction and then sometimes has to pay $30-$40 to do a transfer, right? Versus a platform like Solana and every proof of stake platform where block space isn't a constraint. So that part to me is, I think, like, exciting about the next couple of years, the boring use cases.
Absolutely, that's a very interesting point. And I guess, Teck, there's one last question, just to iterate on this. How do you think Binance users are sticky? Like, are a lot of DeFi users also Binance users? Like, do you think that it's fair to say that you guys have a very strong advantage in this race, essentially?
Yeah. And again, you know, the way I see it is that we all, you know, everyone on panel is competing against the centralized finance world, the Nasdaqs of the world, right? Instead of us competing against each other. So I don't see like everyone, every project on a panel or even beyond, like Ethereum, really competing against each other. We all bring different, differentiating features. For us, obviously, you know, we start out on the trading side, centralized exchange. We bring in a lot of what we call retail users who are very used to kind of trading on UI UX that is super simple, super fast. And then now with the DeFi protocols, we kind of bridge that gap between what they're used to and what, you know, all the technical folks or blockchain native folks, developers who are used to very interacting from non-custodial wallets, from clients, from command lines. So I think we play a role there in bringing a lot of new users to the space, and also bring, you know, we have fiat exchanges as well. We bring in the people who bring in liquidity from the fiat world to the token world, to the decentralized blockchain world. So I think we play a big role there. So everyone on this panel, I think, has, you know, different value add to the whole ecosystem, and together we're competing against, you know, the Nasdaqs of the world, the old way of doing things, and this is the new way of doing things. So that's how I kind of see the world.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, I guess. I mean, do you guys see DeFi as kind of eventually taking the role of like a decentralized Nasdaq, or is it more a decentralized JP Morgan Chase, I guess, something like that? So it's kind of I guess.
I think it's all the above. Right now, centralized finance is not they're very democratized. You know, someone in Africa couldn't get access to Apple stock liquidity, right? Like, only people in the U.S. with access to NASDAQ has the ability to participate in Apple's, value, if you will, or participate or buy a share in Apple or even other U.S. companies that are listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. Whereas in the decentralized world, obviously, it's someone can just log into with access to the internet, can participate in owning tokens and also participate in all these DeFi markets, financial instruments. I think that's super powerful. So I feel like everything that is like centralized has all these limitations. There's freedoms that are kind of limited, constrained through the history of just politics or regulations and all that stuff that limits access. And I think like the blockchain, what we're all trying to do here is to kind of blow that apart, reinvent all these new innovation that allows that democratize access and participation, not only just participating in these protocols, but also innovation too. Someone could deploy a smart contract and a teenager could deploy a smart contract, and we don't even have to trust that person. We don't even need to know who he or she is and be able to verify the smart contracts themselves independently. And that's super powerful. We don't have to trust the Morgans of the world to execute those contracts of financial instruments correctly. I think that's all the whole industry is striving for. I think that leads to a better world in general.
Yeah, in like a weird way, I think like it's weird to say that like a technology competes with another technology, right? Like Microsoft was competing with Linux, but if they would have just ran it as a subsystem, 20 years ago, like it would have just been like part of their tech stack. I think like that's kind of like the difference is that like as engineers we say competing, but we mean like it provides overlapping functionality. Not so much that there is like one business competing with each other, right? It's just tech, right?
Yeah. And also I think competition kind of creates healthy pace of innovation, right? I think it's always good to have that in any industry, and it kind of like makes things not static, so things are more dynamic if there's competition. But then in general, I think everyone here is trying to compete against an old way of doing things and towards something that provides more value for the world. So
yeah, absolutely. Like, what do you think, Kevin? Like, is it? What is the value we provide essentially?
Yeah. I mean, I was part of the the Napster music revolution, and I loved that part. I thought it was so cool that we were basically using technology to change a lot of the ways that old stuff was done. And I think in a lot of ways technology is being used to change the way we do finance, and that's super exciting. Ultimately, I think that's the goal in what I do and what we do. At least speaking personally, but I'm sure everybody else here is like also feels the same way. That I think we're doing something that maybe in a few years we're going to look back and say we were part of that group of people that used technology to push really innovative new stuff and really change finance, and that's going to be really, really exciting to see in a few years, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think on that point of like, competition, collaboration, or is it just overlapping functionality? I think there's obviously a tremendous amount of tribalism in the blockchain space, but then I actually think often these opinions are actually extremely close to each other, right? Compared to someone who's completely outside of the system, and actually these two people that might be in like these small sub tribes that are fighting each other actually fundamentally want the same thing. And I actually think in like very early days in crypto, that was when everything was rallied around Bitcoin, that was very unified. And then quickly this tribalism came up, but it doesn't really get us far. I think on this level of like actual tech, overlapping functionality, trade-offs, and so on, I think it's fair to have that conversation, right? But everything that goes beyond that usually just ends up being shouting at each other on Twitter, and it's just not very productive.